being recorded.
In this second dialogue that the OECD is happy to organize to create the enable conditions to tackle marine plastic pollution, we will have again the opportunity to share successful experiences and create synergies and strong networks among countries and relevant organizations in the region.
ASEAN region has tremendous ocean resources that provide vital ecosystem services for the people. Sadly, the ocean are under immense threat from the pressing issue of marine debris pollution, magnified by the current COVID-19 pandemic.
Let's picture a big, fully loaded with plastic garbage truck. And now picture thousands of them and each one dumping its full cargo into our ocean every other minute. This is what's happening today, and if we do nothing, our research in ESCAP projects that by 2050, each one of these trucks will dump plastic into the ocean every 20 seconds.
Effectively tackling transboundary challenges such as marine plastic pollution requires a coordinated response based on sound scientific evidence. The coordinating body on the seas of East Asia, COBSEA, is a regional intergovernmental mechanism through which countries can identify common priorities, agree shared approaches, and track impact of measures taken.
With greater cooperation between the governments, researchers, and private sectors, we need to find innovative solutions for technological development and financing schemes that are mutually beneficial from social, economic, and environmental perspective.
We have to bring the necessary financial means to support circular economic programs based on advanced, efficient, and comprehensive solid waste management and wastewater treatment systems. We need to bring cutting-edge technologies to replace single-use plastic and toxic chemicals in plastic products. And we have to create policy coherence at international and national levels to avoid illegal trade or unregulated plastic waste dumping. Let's do it.
Okay, I think we are ready to start. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, depending on which part of the world you are joining our dialogue. With this nice video message from the organizers of the regional dialogue, we are ready to start the second day, which is focused on the sharing experiences and looking ahead. And I have a pleasure to moderate this opening session. My name is Eija Kiiskinen, and I'm a Senior Global Relations Advisor to OECD Environment Director. And I have a responsibility of strategic oversight, planning, and coordination of environmental cooperation with non-members in the Environment Directorate at the OECD. And we are very pleased to have this, this dialogue focused on Southeast Asia region and hope to enhance our cooperation in this region, working with the governments and regional partners and other stakeholders. As you can see, we would like to all the speakers or participants, please mute your microphones at all times when the chair gives you the floor. And also, please rename yourself in the participants window so that you put first your country or your organization and then your first name and last name. If you want to ask a question, you can use the raise your hand function. And if the speakers use PowerPoint slides, you can share your screen or email them to Nasera, whose email you'll find in the ground rule slide. So now let me welcome you all to the high-level opening session. We are pleased to have two high-level speakers who represent two of our partner organizations of this event, ASEAN and ESCAP. Our first speaker is His Excellency Mr. Kung Foak, Deputy Secretary General of the ASEAN for ASEAN Socio-Cultural Community, ASCC. TG Kung supports the Secretary General of ASEAN by providing leadership in implementing the ASCC blueprint and leads the ASCC Department of the ASEAN Secretariat. Before assuming this role, Dr. Kung was Under-Secretary of State of the Office of the Council of Ministers of the Royal Government of Cambodia and was working on foreign policy in the Office of the Prime Minister of the Kingdom of Cambodia. TSG Kung, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Asia, for the kind introductions. Mr. Anthony Cox, Deputy Director, Environment Directorate, Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, OECD. Mr. COBSEA, Deputy Executive Secretary, ESCAP, my good friend, good to see you here again. Distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, good morning to all colleagues in Europe and good afternoon to all colleagues here in the region. I'm very pleased, to join all of you today at this second Regional Ocean Policy Dialogue Financing Solution to address marine plastic pollution in Southeast Asia. It is an honor for the ASEAN Secretariat to co-organize the dialogue together with the OECD, the Indonesian Coordinating Ministry for Maritime Affairs and Investment, the coordinating body on the Sea of East Asia, COBSEA, and the UN Economic and Social Commission for Asia and Pacific, ESCAP. My appreciation goes to the co-organizer for excellent arrangement for the virtual convening of this dialogue. 80% of ASEAN region is covered by ocean. ASEAN has some of the longest coastline and tremendous ocean resources that provide vital ecosystem services such as food, water, medicine, and climate regulation. For ASEAN, ocean-based industry serves as an important driver of economic development, representing critical sources of employment and income, especially for coastal communities. The ocean, however, are cumulatively under immense pressure and stress in the region and globally, not only from overfishing, coastal development, and climate change, but also from the pressing issue of marine debris pollution. According to the First World Ocean Assessment, marine debris pollution is becoming one of the fastest growing threats to the health of the world's ocean. Sea turtles, marine mammals, and seabirds, for example, are known to ingest or get entangled by marine debris, leading to physical deformities and other problems. No less than 80% of marine debris originate from the land, and the majority of it is plastics. Increasingly dominant in the consumer marketplace, the global production of plastic have surged to reach around 400 million tons per year in recent decade, equivalent to over 50 kilograms of plastic per person per year. The current COVID-19 pandemic has not only threatened human health, but it also magnified the existing threat of plastic waste. Health workers and other frontline don protective equipment that are essential to fighting the spread of COVID-19. Mask, glove, protective suit, face shield, sanitizer, bottles, and other medical and chemical waste now add to the mounds of trash. A recent Asian Development Bank report estimated that over a period of 60 days during the pandemic, 5 cities in Southeast Asia could collectively produce about 60,000 tons of medical waste. As people stay in the safety of their homes, their reliance on online deliveries and packaged foods has also surged. According to the Thailand Environment Institute, for example, plastic waste in Thailand has increased from 1,500 tons to 6,300 tons per day, owing to soaring home deliveries of foods. Poor waste disposal and leakages may also be exacerbated in areas where services may not be operating at optimal levels. Both post-COVID-19 plastic solution and its leakage to the ocean could become an urgent environmental threat. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, ASEAN puts marine plastic debris high on its agenda. You may have noted that ASEAN adopted the Bangkok Declaration on combating marine debris in the ASEAN region and the ASEAN Framework of Action on Marine Debris in 2019 during Thailand chairmanship. Resource mobilization and partnership development are critical elements underpinning their successful implementation. I wish to highlight two priorities identified in the framework of action, which I think are particularly relevant to the topics of this dialogue. First, the priority to promote investment in preventing and reducing marine plastic debris, including partnership between public and private sectors. And secondly, the priority to promote innovative solutions to improve resource efficiencies, among others, through circular economy approaches. Markets and finance play a major role in shaping the flow of plastic across the value chain, and it is vital to create enabling conditions to attract investment. However, there are currently not enough investment for the management of plastic waste during the whole life cycle of plastic containing products. Based on recent study conducted by ASEAN and EU, some obstacles include difficulties in access to financing for sustainable solutions, such as development of alternative to plastic and efficient post-use processing, and the lack of shared and accepted standard for recyclable to ensure quality control and bring trust to the market. ASEAN is keen to envision our community driven by innovation and emerging skills in circular product design and production, new business models, enabling infrastructure, and coordinated policy framework that supports circular economies in the region. This is where long-term and systematic way to increase public plastic literacy need to be built into education system from early childhood. As the issue of marine plastic debris is transboundary in nature and cannot be solved by one country alone, these challenges need to be addressed with coordinated action and partnership with various actors at multiple levels at all stages of the life cycles of plastics. Recognizing the importance of building partnership, ASEAN has worked closely with dialogue and development partners in the region on these matters. ASEAN adopted the ASEAN +3 Marine Plastic Debris Cooperation Action Initiative and joined the East Asian Summit countries in implementing the EAS Leader Statement on combating marine plastic debris in 2018. Numbers of ASEAN initiatives have been or are currently being implemented. For example, a gap analysis on circular economy for plastic, baseline development and monitoring, capacity building, information sharing, and development of knowledge repository. ASEAN is also supporting the development of national action plan to combat marine debris and is finalizing the regional plan of action for combating marine debris. Together with the OECD and partners, we organized this ocean policy dialogue to elevate the existing partnership and provide opportunity for a mutual learning space for ASEAN member state partners and various stakeholders to identify shared solutions and financing opportunity to reduce marine plastic pollution in the ASEAN region. I noted that the dialogue yesterday is in an exchange of experiences and views on the importance of policy coherence and financing for effective action. I look forward to further discussions, ideas, and insight today, on opportunities in innovative financing solution to create enabling condition for making more plastic management initiative bankable and attract more capitals in these sectors. Ladies and gentlemen, the ongoing crisis of COVID-19 pandemic present not only an enormous challenge, but also a unique opportunity to stimulate investment and innovation on circular economy approaches into a green economic recoveries of our regions. The 37th ASEAN Summit has adopted the ASEAN Comprehensive Recovery Framework, which reflects our optimism and highlights our ability to take advantage of the situation to find innovative ways to further address the needs of our people. Embedded as one of the broad strategy of the recovery plan is to advance toward a more sustainable and resilient future. I hope the dialogue today will stimulate discussion, reconsider, and explore innovative ways of working together to ensure the ASEAN community remains robust and ready for a post-COVID-19 world free of marine plastic debris. Our collective response to this mounting challenge would reflect very well the spirit of cohesive and responsive ASEAN, which was chosen by Vietnam as the themes for ASEAN chairmanship in 2020. I'm confident that through our shared vision and joint efforts, we can work together. We can work toward clean and healthy ocean, supporting a thriving blue economy that is resource efficient, resilient, and innovative, and contributing to ASEAN Community Vision 2025, Sustainable Development Goals, and the Osaka Blue Ocean Vision. ASEAN would not be able to do this alone, and much less accelerate the process without the support from our valuable partner from government, international organizations, UN agencies, industry, private sectors, and other stakeholders groups. On this note, I wish to recognize the valuable commitment and efforts of ASEAN member states and our partners in keeping this a matter of priority, both at national and regional level. And I wish the dialogue fruitful deliberation and outcomes, and look forward to greater support and closer collaboration with existing and new partners. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, TSG Kung, for sharing your priorities of the ASEAN region, and also providing us guidance for today's discussion. I would like now to call our second high-level speaker. Mr. Kaveh Saedi is the Deputy Executive Secretary of the United Nations Economic and Social Commission for Asia and the Pacific, UNESCAP. Mr. Saedi oversees UNESCAP's economic, social, environmental programs, including on finance, trade, energy, natural disasters, statistics, and the overall implementation of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. Prior to his current post, Mr. Saedi worked at the United Nations Environment Programme, including as the Regional Director and Representative for Asia and the Pacific, and Deputy Director of the Division on Technology, Industry and Economics. Mr. Saedi, please take the floor.
Thank you so much. It's an absolute pleasure to join you on the second day of the OECD ESCAP COBSEA Policy Dialogue that is run in partnership with the ASEAN Secretariat and Indonesia's Ministry for Maritime Affairs and Investments. Allow me to first thank, of course, our co-organizers and to acknowledge our special guest, His Excellency Kung Phuoc, Deputy Secretary General of ASEAN for ASEAN Socio-Cultural Community. I think having DSG Phuoc with us is a guarantee that there will be a follow-up to what we discuss during these days of our meeting. I know that many of you were with us as we celebrated World Oceans Day on the 8th of June this year, an occasion that we again used to highlight the unique importance of the oceans in our everyday life, especially here in Asia Pacific. It is really abundantly clear now that the ocean plays a crucial role for the functioning of our planet, from housing a major share of biodiversity and life on the planet to generating vital oxygen and absorbing a significant part of carbon dioxide emissions. Humans simply cannot function without a functioning ocean. Now, the law of the sea was one of the earliest recognitions of the ocean and maritime resources as a worldwide common good, which requires global attention and coordination. But I think what we know now is that our understanding of oceans and their role in sustainable development has evolved considerably since then. And as we embark on the decade of action for the Sustainable Development Goals, the mechanisms of stewardship we have in place may simply not be enough to enable our region to achieve SDG 14 and to safeguard the ocean and its resources for future generations. The quantity of plastic in the ocean is a symptom of our economic system, one that promotes unsustainable production, enormous waste, and thoughtless disposal. We produce more than 350 million tons of plastic each year, and while some plastics, of course, offer meaningful benefits, around 40% are just used once and discarded within minutes. Here in Southeast Asia, the primary source of plastic going into the ocean is from land-based disposal of our cities and urban areas. Southeast Asian cities situated within 50 kilometers from coastlines generate almost 100 million tons of marine litter every year, due mainly to uncollected waste, as well as ineffective municipal waste management systems. And we saw in the video my colleague Stefanos really putting that into perspective in terms of truckloads of plastic being poured into our oceans and seas. So without action, the global production of plastic, of course, is expected to increase, in fact, to double in the next 10 years. And solid waste management systems in our region are simply unable to collect, recycle, and dispose of this growing plastic burden. The result is widespread plastic contamination in the ocean that is in turn consumed by marine life, and as Kung Fuak said, eventually ends up on our tables. Maybe because of this clear impact on us, on people, there is a sense of increasing urgency and appreciation for the action needed. As one example, the 76th ESCAP Commission session, our highest level policy body in this region, for the very first time focused on the oceans, with member states recognizing through a resolution the need to really scale up regional cooperation to protect our oceans, including action, of course, on marine pollution. We're also seeing encouraging signs at the country level. I know, for example, that Indonesia has committed to reduce ocean plastic waste by 70% by 2025, by reducing usage, increasing recycling, and raising public awareness. But despite these emerging initiatives, ESCAP's SDG progress assessment shows that in Asia Pacific, SDG 14 on life below water is regressing. It's going backwards. This is, of course, not just an ocean issue. It's something that's closely linked to poor implementation across other goals, including SDG 11's target on reducing the environmental impact of cities from solid waste management. So action on SDG 11 on sustainable cities and SDG 14 on life below water will need to be aligned to protect the ocean and our maritime resources. And it's in this context that ESCAP initiated the Closing the Loop project, supported by the government of Japan, to turn the spotlight on the importance of the urban-ocean nexus. And the project addresses plastic waste pollution and leakages entering municipal waterways at the source before it enters the ocean and becomes marine litter. The project, very much driven by data and evidence, will help integrate plastic waste management into interventions and, of course, investments into a city action plan, especially for municipal collection and management, as well as for reducing the supply of problematic and unnecessary plastics. As part of the project, cities in ASEAN will also use the latest international plastic waste data collection methodologies combined with smart technologies to produce plastic hotspot waste maps and simulations. And I'm sure my colleague Janet will speak more on this. We have 4 ASEAN pilot cities already working with us: Surabaya in Indonesia, Kuala Lumpur in Malaysia, Nakhon Si Thammarat here in Thailand, and Da Nang in Vietnam. Just to take one, Surabaya, which is Indonesia's second largest city, has already been on the front line in addressing plastic waste, with the ambitious target of becoming free of plastic waste by next year. Looking more at the macro level, countries really are searching for systemic change that embeds circular economy principles to maximize resource efficiency, to reduce waste, and to drive end-to-end value. Dear colleagues, I think many of you who have been reading the news would have seen recently that research now shows that our activity, that human activity, including production of concrete, metal, plastic, bricks, and asphalt, has brought the world to a crossover point where human-made mass, driven mostly by enhanced consumption and urban development, exceeds the overall living biomass on Earth. So the tipping point for our oceans may not be far off, and really the urgency of our work and our discussions here clear for all to see. And because of that, really, I wish you all a successful continuation of this policy dialogue today, and look forward to follow-up action through my institution, ESCAP, through ASEAN under the leadership of DSG Kung Fuak, and through our many projects and partnerships that we'll hear more about today. Thank you so much, and back to you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Sahedi, for your interesting information and your important reflections on this topic. And we are looking forward to cooperating with you and ESCAP and other partners. And thank you, both of you, DSG Kung and Mr. Sahedi, for joining us and in spite of your very busy schedules. So thank you once again. So we are now ready to turn to the third session of our dialogue, which will be moderated by Mr. Stefanos Fotiou, Director of the Environment and Development Division of the UN ESCAP. Stefanos, please take the floor now. You will continue moderating this session. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Elsa, and let me also thank from my side DSG Puak and our Deputy Executive Secretary Kave for setting up the tone for this second day. And they set up a tone of solutions, a tone that it's recognizing the problem, but at the same time, it's very optimistic that we do have solutions, we do have case studies, we do have good practices, and we need to augment them. And this is what we will try to do in this session, and we will try to listen from people that they can share experiences and good practices in addressing marine plastic pollution from different actors and across different phases of the plastic life cycle to inspire action from others. And in this group, we do have experts which I will present now, trying to make a storyline on what these good practices will be about. So we have first Mr. Thomas Choa, a senior advisor in the office of the CEO in the Alliance to End Plastic Waste, which has this very ambitious plan to end plastic. And to end plastic waste, we need to reduce the use of plastics as much as possible. But we know that it's probably extremely impossible in the short term to completely eliminate the use of plastic. So we need to make sure that whatever plastic is used, it could be recycled, it could be reused. And for this, we'll have my colleague Zanet, Economic Affairs Officer from the Environment and Development Division in UN ESCAP, to talk about the Closing the Loop project. And to do this thing, to reduce the waste, to reduce the use of plastic, to close the loop, we need to have some startups, some new enterprises that they will make this happen, so they will ensure the long-term sustainability of these impacts. And for this, we have Ms. Jocelyn Matallas, the Venture Development Lead in the Incubation Network of Second Muse, to share their experiences. But there's already some plastic waste out there, and we have to deal with this. And for this, we will listen from Siddharth Gupta, the founder of the ClearBoat, which is an initiative to clean the seas from what damage we have done so far. And last but not least, we need to make sure that all of this work is done together with communities. And for this, we have Dominic Thompson, the Deputy Director and Project Management in Southeast Asia at the Environment Justice Foundation, which is working with the communities to solve our plastic problem. So with this introduction, I would like now to turn over to our speakers, and I would like to start with Mr. Thomas Choa, and with the first question on describing your initiative and the enabling factors that they can make change happen. Mr. Choa, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Fatou. Okay, so thank you very much for this opportunity to speak to you again. I had the pleasure of joining you physically last year in Bali for this dialogue, and I'm grateful that we have the opportunity from the Alliance to End Plastic Waste to address you again. Of course, 12 months have passed, and I'm glad to say that the Alliance to End Plastic Waste have progressed tremendously, which is probably best summarized if you were to go to our website and have a look at our progress report 2020. So we have limited time here in this session, but I would encourage you to go to our website, which I'll post up on the conversation page in a few minutes, where there is access to our progress report for 2020, and you can take your time browsing through them. But let me just do a little recap about the Alliance. So the Alliance is formed by the industry. So we believe that this is the only global large-scale industry alliance that has come together to address the issue of plastic waste. So we're not pretending to end plastic, but we're definitely wanting to eliminate plastic waste from the environment, and that includes clearly in the ocean. And it is formed by member companies. So member companies have committed to contribute their share in order to fund the activities to drive that mission. And last year, when I was addressing this dialogue, we had about 40 plus companies. So I'm glad to say that by the end of this year, we would have over 50 members. So we're growing our membership. Our target is to continue growing membership to bring together companies, global companies who are in the plastic value chain to address this common and important problem that we have. So the report will also give you a listing of all our member companies, and they include, global Fortune 500 companies across the value chain like ExxonMobil, Shell, Dow, companies like Sinopec, but it also includes brand companies like Pepsi Cola, Procter & Gamble, and in fact, the chairman of the Alliance to End Plastic Waste is the CEO of Procter & Gamble, and our president and CEO was an ex-UN executive. So pulling together the resources, these global companies have committed to spend hundreds of millions of dollars over the next 5 years. Their target is not small. Their target is to eliminate literally millions of tons of plastic waste. So we're not talking about 50 tons. We're not talking about 100 tons. We're not talking about 2,000 tons. We're talking about millions of tons, around the world. So we have progress reports, projects in countries like Indonesia. In Jembrana, we've launched the project to address the issue of 150,000 people. In the Philippines, we've commissioned this project called Planks of Promise, converting plastic waste into building material, particularly to provide shelter for the typhoons there. And we have joined forces with UN Habitat, with USAID, looking at global oceans plastic pollution. And recently, in fact, just a week ago, we have signed up with IBM to track global plastic waste in the environment. Those are just some small examples. And we continue to develop a pipeline of projects over time. And some of the key themes we're working on, I think this will address particularly the topic of this particular session, is around design for recycling. Okay, so we have through this project team, we have a number of what we call themes that we work on, and you will find this also in our progress report. So the themes are, for example, engaging with cities. So we're working in numerous cities around the world, including South America, India, Indonesia, obviously. But we also are working on another theme called creating value for recyclers. So, obviously, we see plastic waste also as a resource that can be recycled, a resource that can deliver more value over time. So there is a theme that we're driving, which draws on the capabilities of our member companies to create value for these recyclers. And the third theme we're working on is what we call advanced recovery and recycling. So yesterday in the session, I've heard about needing new innovative technologies to address plastic waste, to convert them into useful products. So we have a work stream that specifically drives this particular objective of advancing those technologies. And we have a fourth stream called design for circularity. So in other words, when we produce these products, we bear in mind this sort of design for the ability to deliver circularity, as was mentioned also at the start of this conversation. And finally, we have a work stream on societal behavior. So we would, for example, fund activities and projects that look at how to address societal behavior. I was glad to hear yesterday a lot of coverage around the need to change behavior, the need to address the issue around the fact that waste is actually not valueless. If we can create value out of it, it's a resource, and societal behavior plays a very important part in that whole effort. The uniqueness of the Alliance is that not only do these global companies contribute financial capabilities in addressing the elimination of plastic waste, but the companies, because they are in the value chain, also provide expertise in addressing plastic waste. Member companies like, for example, Suez and Veolia, which are world-class waste management companies, they also bring with them all the expertise to support the elimination of plastic waste in that process. So we're very excited about the years to come. We have very ambitious target for 2021. We like to think that we have achieved the target for 2020. So it's not just about setting targets, it's about meeting those targets. We're glad to say that we are growing our team, we're growing our presence around the world. And I will encourage you to go to our website and find out more about us. And the last point I'd like to make is that the Alliance to End Plastic Waste is a not-for-profit organization. In fact, it is registered as a public charity in the US. Our role is not only to provide funds and grants for good initiatives to end plastic waste, but also to catalyze investment in order to address this massive issue. We recognize that the Alliance on its own is not capable of addressing, obviously, this enormous mission. So collaboration is very key for us, and we are talking to multiple organizations around the world to achieve that objective. With that, Mr. Fatou, I hand it over back to you.
Thank you, Mr. Choa, and a lot of important information from your side. I would like to keep this ambition you have and the target to eliminate millions, as you say, tons, and not just a couple of or a dozen tons. Thank you very much for this optimism. Janet, over to you. What will happen with the plastic that is already in use and the one that will be produced while Mr. Choa will try to eliminate it?
Okay, great. Thanks, Stefanos. So I'm from the Closing the Loop project, which is managed by UN ESCAP with the support of the government of Japan. So what we're doing is we are working with the cities, as Kaveh said earlier. So when we're helping the cities to develop a city level action plan, I've done it, I'll put it on my little background here. So we want to help cities prevent marine plastic by developing some action plans that target where that plastic is coming from and where it's going. Now, in order to do that, we have to help them measure, I've got the top one, and monitor the plastic. So to measure the plastic, what that means is that we need to know where it's coming from, because once it's in the ocean, it's usually come from urban rivers. So we need to assess which rivers they're coming from and how did it get to the river? Because from the point that you use the plastic item to the point where it ends up in the river, there are many different points along that chain where it could have leaked. They call plastic leakage, where it could have fallen out of that chain, either because there wasn't a bin, or there was a bin, but things weren't collected in time, or there was a flood, or there was a big cultural event that overloaded the waste management system. Or maybe it was collected and even went to a landfill, but the landfill was unsecured. And so with inclement weather, it sort of leaked out into the rivers. Or maybe it was collected, but then informally dumped somewhere that managed to make its way to the river. So we do that, those calculations using primary data and then a tool called the Plastic Pollution Calculator, which was developed by the International Solid Waste Association. and the University of Leeds. So that's the first step that we do to measure the plastic waste along the value chain for each city. Which cities? I've got them on this side. We've got Nakhon Si Thammarat in Thailand, the Venice of Thailand, with lots of beautiful canals. We've got Kuala Lumpur, the capital of Malaysia. We've got Da Nang, quite interesting in this case because it's also quite a digitally advanced city. And Surabaya, Indonesia, which has a lot of innovative plastic waste prevention initiatives. So once we have measured the plastic waste, we have a pretty good idea which items they are. Is it bottles, bags, containers? We have a good idea which districts they're coming from, and we have a good idea at which point of that waste chain it leaked out into the waterways. So the second step is to monitor. So it's not just good enough to measure and put it into a model. The cities also want us to look and see what's going on in those rivers. Now, of course, we can't look, but technology can. So we use remote sensors. So different kinds of sensors can play different roles. You can use satellites for large accumulations of plastic, but you can also use 360-degree cameras or CCTV. You can use waste log booms and just sort of measure them manually every so often, or you can use crowdsourcing. So training people to use an app on their phone, take photos, and load that up onto a platform. Now, what do you do with all that information? Well, you can't have someone look at every photo individually. So we use artificial intelligence or machine learning. We train algorithms to look at these pictures and detect different items of plastic waste so that we can get an idea, a map actually, of hotspots of plastic waste in those cities. So now the cities, while they're developing those action plans, they have an idea of calculations of where the plastic came from, what type, how much, where in this chain it failed. Secondly, they have real-time hotspots maps to know where they are, if they actually want to go and collect that water, that plastic from the rivers themselves, or just to monitor whether their action plans are working over time. So that's what we're doing in the Closing the Loop project. We're very, I should mention actually why this is working well. It's working very well because we have the ASEAN Framework of Action on Marine Debris, which gives us a clear structure framework under which we can operate. So we can try all these things with our 4 cities, but then also share those experiences with other cities in ASEAN. We also have a very good project advisory committee where we have Second Muse, very grateful to have, we have Alliance to End Plastic Waste. They've introduced us to Second Muse. So, and many other partners, most importantly, the ASEAN Secretariat, they're helping us. Another enabling factor is technology. Technology is advancing very fast. And I hope that in the future, all those satellites, all that remote sensing will help us get real-time data about where the plastic is around the world to help us better manage our interventions. So that's it for today. Thank you very much, Stefanos.
Janet, thank you very much. And let me say that having seen that the work that you are developing with the partners, we are really, all of us, excited, I think, to see these first maps of plastic hotspots, and later on even to see the animations of how the plastic is flowing from the generation to the sea and how we can avoid this. Until this is happening and until we make sure that you can prevent everything, we need to make sure that we have sustainable solutions, and it's really important we have startups and businesses to take over this. So I would like to ask Jocelyn to enlighten us on, can we be optimistic that the solutions that now we test probably in projects could really become business opportunities?
Great question. I'll start a little bit before I dive into that question, which I'm dying to answer. I'll start a little bit with an introduction to my organization, Second Muse, and our project that is relevant to the discussion, which is called the Incubation Network. So for those of you that don't know us, I'm representing Second Muse, which specifically our team here in Asia that's located and headquartered out of Singapore is working on a project with our partner, the Circulate Initiative, which is the sister nonprofit organization of Circulate Capital, on a project called the Incubation Network. Now, the Incubation Network is an initiative that sits here representing South and Southeast Asia to end ocean plastic pollution by looking at innovation and entrepreneurship as a catalyst for that progress. And so as a result, what we do is we design and implement programs that source, support, and scale innovative solutions for addressing ocean plastic pollution here in South and Southeast Asia. And uniquely, what we do is I always kind of visualize what we do as a double-sided funnel. And what we do is we look at global innovations that are happening around the globe and want to provide them with the support that they need to refine those models to work for South and Southeast Asia and to connect them to the local communities where we need to pilot, test, and ideally replicate those solutions with it. On the other end of the spectrum, we, as called the Incubation Network, we also have a network of partners that work locally on the ground across 5 key countries in South and Southeast Asia. Right now, it's Indonesia, India, Thailand, Vietnam, and the Philippines. And we have partners that are local on the ground, sourcing entrepreneurs and innovators that have ideas from within their own communities. And then what we do is we connect them to regional and global resourcing and partners to be able to take those most promising ideas and truly replicate them across the region so that they have potential. So to go back, Stefanos, to your question about, can we count on innovation to really move the needle on this issue? I'd love to point out 2 things when we talk about innovation and entrepreneurship as a catalyst. As we know, the private sector is definitely a huge source for innovative, bold ideas that really reset the parameters for what policymakers and and larger actors can really, how they can really think and envision a future, especially a future without ocean plastic pollution. So yes, they play a huge central role. However, I feel like what we're alluding to in this question is that what we can't do is think of the private sector and entrepreneurship as a magic wand. If those of us in the waste management recycling sector know that this is a complex issue, and here in South and Southeast issue, the system that we work in is very fragmented. And so something that we stress in the Incubation Network, and by essence of our very brand as, again, a network, is that in order to make these innovations and these solutions from the private sector, in order to allow them to work, we really need to make sure that we build a connected community that streamlines efforts, that gives access to supply chains, and that also has support of actors across sector from public and private sector that helps these solutions plug into the current system. Because as we know, these are complex systems, somewhat informal, somewhat formal, and in order to move forward, we just all need to be connected and a bit more integrated and provide opportunities for these solutions to plug into this existing system. The second thing I always like to point out, again, the reason why we take a network-centered approach is that when we're talking about waste management recycling, a lot of times, the solutions and the change is first going to happen in the communities that know what we see communities as markets. Markets are communities. And so we see it as crucial to both behavior change, to shifting the demands of the market and making their viable markets for these solutions to thrive as business models. We see communities playing a huge role. And for that reason, we can't disregard the importance of local communities in these conversations and in really being the key kind of fuel behind these solutions and finding innovations that will work.
Thank you very much, Jocelyn. And I get your point that the private sector is one element of the solution. I would say it's a very big element of the solution, and something that in addition that I think the private sector can do, it has a very big leverage on talking to the governments, because the private sector is really the one that provides employment, provides income opportunities. And I think the governments are listening a lot to the private sector. So we do hope that all these startups, all these new businesses will try not only to, of course, support their shareholders, but at the same time take this kind of responsibility that it's needed and act as leverage for the governments to be more proactive. Thank you very much, Jocelyn. So I will turn now to Siddharth. Siddharth, ideally, one day we'll have business solutions that they will have eliminate the plastic. We will not have the plastic, but there's a lot of plastic waste out there now. So your floor is yours to let us know how you support the reduction of this plastic waste.
Sure. Thank you so much for that, Stefanos. So I'll start by basically introducing how our initiative came up and sort of what we do. So about a year and a half back, we were actually in Bali in Indonesia, and we noticed the amount of trash that was there in their rivers, in their water. And what we found out is that there were already community efforts to try and clean that, to sort of keep the water clean. The challenge seemed to be that they simply could not handle the volume of trash that was going through. So even when the sort of community was there, and even though the government had some level of funding to clean that up, it simply could not be scaled at a scale where it made sense, right? And so we came back, actually, so we're based out of Hong Kong. We came back to Hong Kong and we noticed the same problem here, right? So Hong Kong's a place where there's a lot more funding available for marine cleanup, and the tools are a little better. But fundamentally, what we noticed is, well, wherever you go, the best solutions are still far behind. So pretty much everywhere in the world, people are using sort of these boat and net-based collectors, right? By and large, to do cleaning. And in places like Indonesia, sometimes it's excavators if things are really bad. And what we find is in a lot of places, they can't even use motorboats. So we were speaking to someone in Surabaya and they said that they can't use motorboats because there's so much trash that the trash gets stuck in propellers. And so they're left with cleaning the water with paddle boats. So we looked at this from a sort of technology standpoint, and we basically said that, if we want to have a reasonable shot at cleaning up what's already out there, we need to use technology in a meaningful way to scale this up. And so our initiative, ClearBot, is basically the idea to have a swarm of robots that can collect trash out of the water autonomously. And what we've done is these robots now have an onboard camera that's constantly looking at the water and trying to ID the trash. So Janet spoke a little earlier about how AI is coming into all of this. So at the moment, for example, our AI can recognize about 64 different classes of trash with varying levels of accuracy. And what all of this really means is that well, one is from a cost standpoint, it's actually cheaper because if you're running a cleanup 24 hours, it's much cheaper to do it autonomously, even in Southeast Asia where labor is relatively more affordable. The robots have a lot more reach, and that's very important in terms of scaling, right? Especially if you're trying to clean up a longer section of river, it's very hard to do manually, while with an automated system, you might actually have a good chance. We can collect a lot more trash because the volumes of these robots can be adjusted. And I think the most interesting aspect of this is actually the data that we're generating. So not only are we collecting things out of the water that are already there, but we also find out what's actually in the water. So what kind of plastics are there, what kind of trash is ending up there. And so that helps us kind of look at the whole problem in a more meaningful way, right? And at the moment, we are basically trying to do a pilot in Surabaya. Currently, we're on hold due to COVID, but we've signed an MOU, so we're kind of waiting to fly there. And we've also started working with land reclamation companies in Hong Kong. So during land reclamation, we generate a lot of floating trash, and it's very difficult to collect that. And so we ended up seeing that there was a very commercially viable way for us to work on cleanups, right? And so that's kind of the path that we're following right now. And I think that if we look back at our own kind of journey, and we look at the factors that have managed, because of which we've managed to get even here, I think there's basically 4 or 5 things that are really sort of key to making this work. I think the very first thing is having some level of basic financing instrument, right? Especially with technology innovation, there has to be finance that's willing to take some amount of risk. And without that, we're not going to see innovative solutions come out to the market. So I think that even at the government level, there needs to be more of an initiative to take a bit of risk and invest in innovation. I think the next few things are kind of also what other speakers have spoken about, which is political commitment at the local level. And that's the most important, right? Because I think at the high level, it's always there. But what you find is when you go down to the local level, speaking to the mayors, that's when things get complicated. And so having that commitment at the local level, super, super important. Then tying into what Jocelyn was saying earlier, I think partnerships to well, the local ecosystem, as well as driving community engagement, right? Now that's something typically from a technology startup standpoint, it's not something that you would normally consider doing, right? Most startups don't have to do that. But in this space, because the ecosystem is so complex and so fragmented, you actually do need to have this whole new element, which normal companies would not have, around simply developing local partnerships and engaging community to own this sort of infrastructure that we're building out. And I think this is where sort of the incubators come in and do a really good job of helping us out. So yeah, and
thank you, Siddharth. And it's nice to hear from you also the focus on working with the communities. So Dominic, let me turn to you. You work directly with the communities for another big problem of plastic waste, which is the lost fishing gear. Would you share your experience with us?
Absolutely. Thank you, Stefanos, and thank you, OECD, for having me. It's great to be here. So yeah, I'm from the Environmental Justice Foundation, and we recently started the Net Free Seas project here in Thailand. We launched early this summer, and our project is all about community-based recycling of fishing nets. So we've worked in the fisheries industry for the last 5 years, looking at illegal fishing, and I think we'll touch on that later in the session. And so we've always had this very close connection with the oceans. And so we wanted to look at the this new threat that's coming up, which is fishing net waste, and seeing how we can work with the local communities and government agencies to build a system and a network whereby communities can be in direct contact with recyclers and actually get financial benefit from collecting this incredibly damaging marine litter. So at the moment, we work with 47 communities across the country, and they're spread all across the Gulf of Thailand and also Andaman Sea. So we've tried to have a really nice spatial sort of distribution of the communities that we work with. And what we try to do is consult with the communities, understand what the level of the problem is in that local community or that district, and then put them directly in contact with the recycling partners. And we've now got MOUs with 3 recycling partners in Thailand. And that allows us to make a whole range of different products, from the industrial pellets themselves through to consumer products, such as this coaster, for example. This turtle coaster has been entirely made from Thai fishing nets. So it's just a nice proof of concept at this stage to show what is actually capable from using this technology and from using these perfectly recyclable plastic fishing nets. And so at this point, as of December, we've collected 15 tons of fishing nets, and we've removed those both from the coastal ecosystems, but also from marine ecosystems as well. So working with these local communities and trying to gather up as much of this netting material as possible, but also making it worth their while for the communities to actually participate. So we try to give communities slightly higher than market rate. And usually we do this to incentivize the communities to try and clean the nets, or at least pre-process them in such a way that when they actually get to the recyclers, they're actually suitable to be immediately shredded and remelted and turned into something new. So we try to give them a nice financial incentive for participation so that it's actually worth their while. And so with our project, because we're trying to connect communities directly with the recyclers, our supply chain is incredibly simple and also transparent. And I think that's really important whenever you're trying to implement a project such as this, is that you want to make sure that your logistics, your supply chain, and the products that you're shipping are all being transparently and traceability sort of orientated, so that there's no opportunities for potential corruption or for leakages or for products that aren't part of your original supply actually ending up at the recyclers and being entered into your project. Because our project is so simple, it also means it's incredibly scalable and replicable as well. So at the moment, we've got 47 communities, but we're hoping to take that up to 100 communities within the next 2 or 3 years. And we'll see the project grow across Thailand. And hopefully within that time, that 2 or 3 year time frame, we'll be able to recycle up to 50 tons of fishing nets as well. So that should be really exciting to see happen over the next 2 or 3 years. What also makes our project really unique is that it's all based in Thailand. All the communities are Thai, the recyclers are Thai, and the product manufacturers are also Thai. So it means that we're not having to ship the nets across the globe and contributing to climate change. And it also means that our supply chain is very robust and very efficient. And it hasn't really been affected by COVID and restrictions on trade. So that's really what sets our project apart from a lot of other initiatives across the globe at the moment, looking at recycling fishing nets. We always strived to make sure everything could take place in Thailand. So I think that probably draws my presentation to a close. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dominic, and thanks all the speakers that you have presented here, your best practice, what you are doing and how you address different parts of the problem of plastic and marine pollution. So I would like to start a second round of discussion. I know we are a little bit out of time, so I would like to ask you kindly in the next interventions, if you can take only 2 minutes. And let me start with you, Dominic, from what you mentioned about the problem with the lost fishing gears. I mean, one of the problems that the lost fishing gears are contributing is the ghost fishing. So all of these gears, actually, they are continue to capturing fish and the fish is dying. And this is part of an overall non-sustainable fishing practices. So, of course, the problem needs to be confronted. But what about measures that can be adopted by countries to combat more holistically unsustainable fishing practices?
Yeah, so with ghost nets and other problems that we've looked at here in Thailand, they're very closely connected. So I touched on illegal fishing earlier, but also overfishing is a huge problem, or used to be here in Thailand. And those are historically some of the issues that we've looked at. And now looking at ghost gears, it's clear that if we address these gears and we look at ways to regulate them better, regulate the fishing vessels better, then you can actually address all 3 of these different issues at the same time. So one of the main regulations we're looking at the moment is gear marking. And this is something the FAO has been leading, and they have these guidelines that they're producing for countries. And so this is all about just attaching small tags on fishing gears that have certain information about the manufacturer, the material, the owner, and maybe the vessel that it's from as well. And this information would be hugely useful to tackle both the ghost fishing gear issue, because it would allow us and communities and recyclers to know exactly what material a net is straight away. But it would also allow governments and enforcement agencies to be able to tell whether gears have actually come as a result of illegal fishing, and be able to trace that back both to the owner of the fishing vessel, but also the manufacturer as well. So it's all of these ideas maybe about extended producer responsibility becoming intertwined. There's a lot of talk about that in the European Union, for example. And so this is just taking that one extra step and making sure that fishing nets are actually part of that EPR as well. So I think that's probably one of the main ways that we can tackle it. But then a secondary way is also just demarcating better the coral reefs and the marine protected areas to make sure that fishing vessels don't actually stray into those areas. And then tying that with better patrols, better enforcement, so that fishing vessels aren't tempted to stray into those lucrative areas in search of fish. And so then that way you wouldn't actually have the scenarios where these fishing nets get snagged on underwater structures or coral reefs in the first place.
Thank you, Dominic. So it's nice to hear that we need actually a portfolio of measures, a portfolio of solutions to tackle holistically the problem of unsustainable fishing. Siddharth, let me come to you. You are tackling another problem, the problem that there's so much waste, plastic waste out there. But don't you see a risk that some people might say, you know, if I have these technologies, if I have robots that they can take the plastic out of the water, I'm fine. I can pollute and clean up later. So how we can ensure, you know, that we don't promote your solution as the silver bullet, but just a transition measure for long-term measures that they can really stop plastic from getting into the ocean?
Sure, thank you for that, Stefanos. So I think there's three things that actually why I think this will not end up being a kind of silver bullet for people to look at. The first is at the high level, the focus does seem to be of organizations to sort of work on the recycling side of things, right? To move packaging to be better, to reduce plastic or make it more circular in the first place. And the second is that even I do think that ocean cleanup activity gets a lot more attention. But the net result of that attention is that consumer behavior is changing, right? Consumers are becoming more aware of what they're buying and how they're using things. And that I think that consumer behavior is eventually, therefore, in the long term, going to go back and result in innovation on the product side in the first place, right? And so in a funny way, even though it might be getting more attention, cleanups are probably driving the long-term sort of solutions eventually. And I think the last thing is to be said is that there is a place still for this kind of technology, even in the long term, because there are problems with collection systems, there are leakages that are hard to control and track. And I do think that even in the long term, there will be a place for this kind of technology to continue to exist. So, yeah.
Thank you very much, Sindat, for this message. And of course, we will need to support your efforts, and we want more of more like these efforts that you're doing, because there's so much plastic waste out there, and we need to deal with this at the same time when we're stopping plastic from entering the oceans. Jocelyn, let me turn to you. You mentioned, and I agreed with you, that the private sector is one of the many actors of the solution. So what you would like to see from the governments, how the governments can create an enabling environment for the development and the sustainability of this type of startups that your incubation network is putting together?
Yeah, great question. So there's a couple angles for this, and there's definitely playing a role in enabling environment for entrepreneurship and innovation. To actually echo what Sid was also mentioning, is there's also a role for governments, local all the way to national and even regional international actors, to also play a role in providing earlier stage capital and really being able to take on some of that initial risk that innovation needs to be able to scale as a business model. Now, on the opposite end of the spectrum, to be very frank, sometimes the economics in recycling make it really challenging for businesses to thrive. And that's where I see the government playing a big role. The government has the ability to help prop up the market for recycled plastics and recycled resins, and to use policy as a way to make that market and those economics for these companies more viable. And I truly think that without that, it's going to be really hard for especially these budding or new innovations in this space to economically compete and be viable. And we're hearing that a lot. And so, yeah, I'd say there's two different angles. One, for all startups in this space to build a more enabling environment and supportive policies for them, but two, to also help prepare the market and use policy to build a market for especially recycled materials and recycled products. And so, yeah, I'd say those are two of the best places. The other thing, maybe if I could add just one more, is an approach that we also take is recognizing the importance of entrepreneur support organizations in being able to help bring these solutions to fruition, and seeing them as also a place to invest alongside the startups. As I mentioned, we work with over 50 different entrepreneur support partners, which are incubators and accelerators that work locally. They also have business models, and it's really hard for them to thrive sometimes. So, we specifically worked through our Plastics Data Challenge directly with Sid, and was able to help him get from a place without a valid business model or kind of a thought out business model for Southeast Asia to developing that model, and then getting on the ground to a pilot and introducing him to the key partners that can get those MOUs signed and the pilots moving out in those communities. And so we do play a role as connectors and to help provide those introductions in those communities. And I think governments can play a role in recognizing that and using that also as a tool to build more enabling environments on the ground.
Thank you very much, Jocelyn. And I'm very sure that the participants that are from the governments today, they are listening to you, and they will start putting all these recommendations in their policies. Now, Janet, we tackled, I think we have talked about two big problems: the existing plastic waste, the abandoned fishing gears. Another problem that emerged because of the COVID pandemic is the increased use of plastic. I think only in Thailand, and according to the Thai Environment Institute, in the first 3 or 4 months after the pandemic, we had a 40% increase of the single plastic use. Has the Closing the Loop project taking this into account, and how are you adapting to this new challenge of the additional plastic that is produced?
Yeah, we have to take it into account. There's no choice. It's really, it's not only changing dynamics around plastic use, but it's also front and center of policy attention. So we need to take it into account. Otherwise, we'll get too many questions that would delay things. So how do we do it? Well, firstly, we've had to introduce a new category in the plastic pollution calculator. It hasn't been done before, but we've done it together with the University of Leeds. And then we also had to introduce primary data collection. So we have people, we have experts going out there and doing data sampling on the ground and really like sorting through and checking how much PPE is out there in terms of number of items and where they are and which sector. And then when it comes to prevention in the city level action plans, I think that also regarding the single-use plastic, not only the PPE, we really want to have hard data to know, did it really increase or not? I know there are some numbers saying that it did, but we are wondering, because economic activity declined so much, and economic activity is associated with single-use plastic. So we do want to check, did that dynamic reduce plastic waste in any way, or did the other dynamics of cheaper plastic, concerns about hygiene, and also lesser capacity of the waste management systems in the cities we're operating in. So a lot of people had to stay home, couldn't do that recycling or collection activities. Did it contribute to more? So it's really a matter of getting those numbers down for each of those cities. But when it comes to the prevention part of it, a lot of the points that the previous speakers mentioned, especially Jocelyn, I really felt that that was a really important point about making sure that there are solutions on the market. So if you want to reduce single-use plastic use, you need to have good alternatives. And it's a really good idea to engage the innovative parts of our economy, startups, entrepreneurs, and really support them, especially at early stage when the system's really against them, especially in terms of the economics. But even in late stage, because the economics really doesn't work except for a few types of plastic waste that are really the caviar of secondary plastic, like the nylon in the fishing nets or the PET in plastic drink bottles. But all those hard to recycle plastics or low value plastics, what do we do with them? So if we have alternatives that are on the market, that would be much better. The other thing that needs to happen is we need to create a more circular economy by ensuring that this sort of whole supply chain works together to reduce and reuse plastic. That could be part of the Build Back Better packages that governments are developing. That's really a once in a lifetime opportunity to shift or to use public money to change the way our economy is structured. So I think those Build Back Better policy packages, especially usually in the third part, they have the sustainable resilient society investment components would be good. And the use of fiscal policy. So things won't get recycled unless they have a value as a recyclate, and alternatives to single-use plastic won't really work unless single-use plastics are more expensive. So we need to see if we can connect ministries of finance with ministries of environment, or even better yet, with local governments who are responsible for the plastic waste in the end, and see if they can use these fiscal policy tools to reduce single-use plastic usage. Thanks, Stephanos. Stop there.
Thank you, Janet. And you put an important point, which is that in periods of crisis, the experience now shows that the fiscal space could be created for additional interventions. And I think that this is a good lesson, and exactly this lesson could be taken to address the plastic pollution. We need to create this fiscal space. Thomas, we started with you, and I would like to close this second round and actually this session with you by asking you, you mentioned in the beginning that one of the streams you're working is the front-end design of plastic products. So could you let us a little bit know what are the improvements in the front-end design of plastic products and material innovation that can really change completely this industry? Thomas, the floor is yours.
Yeah, I think, so in that context, this comes under one of our thematic work stream called Design for Recycling. And I think Janet mentioned earlier on about also creating value for recyclates, which is another stream that we're working on. I have to say that, you know, with these different streams of activities, member companies put in the best experts to come up with alternatives and development. A lot of that skill, a lot of the specific development are undertaken by member companies themselves. So if you look at, you know, a member company like, for example, Pepsi Cola, or if you look at a member company like Procter & Gamble, they are developing their own, you know, design and alternatives for increased recyclability of these products. What the Alliance does is to basically drive some of these initiatives, particularly with other partners outside of our membership companies. You know, we are a sponsor of Circulate Capital, for example, and indirectly also through to Circulate initiatives. And we are a partner of many other innovation companies in terms of developing new materials and technology. So in the area of new materials, this is sort of early stage. As you would understand, developing of new, particularly new material will take time, not only in terms of ensuring commercial viability, but also ensuring, for example, if it's to do with food packaging, is to comply with food safety standards and all of those sort. I think it's been mentioned earlier on that you've got high value plastics like PET, for example, which, you know, nowadays is very proven in terms of recyclability, even to comply with food safety standards. Although getting to 100% recyclability is, you know, still a little bit of a challenge, but it's heading in that direction. So I have a lot of confidence in terms of technology development over time. And what the Alliance would like to do is play a part in ensuring those technologies continue to develop, continue to innovate. We are cooperating with a number of universities to drive even research work at the outset, bringing on a pipeline of opportunities going forward. So that's what we're doing, Stefanos.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Thomas. And thank you very much to everybody. That gives me, and Thomas, your word that we have technologies, but we need some time. It gives me also the starting point to wrap up this session. I think we have listened a great number of good practices, of successful cases on how we can tackle the problem. And each one of these practices, addressing the problem by collecting the waste, making better design of plastic product, closing the loop, having startups on making the plastic waste management a long-term sustainable solution, are all of them very valuable. And I think they need to be integrated. And at one point, one solution to start pulling and pushing the other. So Thomas said, we have technologies, we need some time. So at this point, probably Clearbot and AGF could step in and say, okay, on this time, this is how we'll contribute. At the point that also Jocelyn with their startups and Janet with their closing the loop, they try to develop some medium to long-term solutions. And all of us, I think all of you really need to present this to the governments and have a push and pull approach with the governments to create the enabling factors that you have all identified. So I will not summarize here what you have said. I think everything was very clear. There are some questions in the chat, so I will ask the colleagues from the OECD to collect them, and then you could go back and answer by email to the colleagues that they have put the questions. I want to thank very much all of you for a very nice session. I enjoyed very much. And now I will hand over to my colleague Anthony Cox to continue with the next session. Thank you to everybody.
Okay, thank you very much, Stefanos. And that was indeed a very rich and interesting session on the on-the-ground practices that people are putting in place, that organizations are putting in place. We look forward to delving into these ideas even more in the breakout sessions where we are about to head. So in this session, session 4, we will be calling upon all our participants to put their thinking caps on to help us try and crystallize the ideas we've heard in the last day and a half around this nexus between marine plastic pollution, financing, and policy coherence. The aim is to head towards a guidance for effective and coherent approaches to reducing marine plastic pollution. We intend to develop the ideas coming out of this dialogue, and as well as the dialogue that we had last year, in order to, as I said, bring together the key things that governments need to focus on in trying to make headway and make progress on reducing marine plastic pollution across these 3 areas around policy, financing, and cooperation. What we're going to do today is that we will be breaking up into 3 groups, and the focus areas for each group are on the screen right now. We did share with you a document in advance of the dialogue which lays out the questions that the groups will address. There will be a facilitator in each group who will moderate the focused discussions in each breakout group, and we will have a note taker who will capture your thoughts or your ideas and the dynamics of the discussion throughout the session. In order to make it practical, we ask participants to raise their hand using the Zoom function when they intervene, and the facilitator will call on participants to speak in order to avoid multiple speakers intervening at the same time. I just remind you to focus your responses and to move through what you need to say quickly in order to allow the discussion to continue to flow and allow sufficient time for everyone in the breakout group to contribute. Of course, we'd also like you to, we would encourage you to provide written contributions either in the Zoom chat box or following the breakout group by email. If there's anything that you were not able to raise during the discussion or which you thought about afterwards, please don't hesitate to bring it to our attention. I should inform you that the breakout group discussions will be recorded. So I hope that is fine for everybody. So with that, I think we can now shift to the breakout groups. You have all been assigned to a particular breakout.
Hello, good afternoon, good evening, good morning. My name is Omar Sadiq. I'm from ESCAP. I hope everyone can see and hear me. Welcome to the Coordination and Cooperation Breakout Group, which I think is a common theme that was coming out not only from today's discussion, around, a whole of government approach, whole of society approach in addressing marine plastic litter in Southeast Asia, but also through intergovernmental platforms. And we heard a lot from the ASEAN Secretariat this morning, but also yesterday. I just want to check before we start, my note taker, Mr. Alex Lee Emery from ESCAP is here and at the ready.
Yeah. We're ready.
Okay. Great. So this is really, as Anthony said, at the interactive segment of today, where we're trying to get from you what would be some of your top guidance in terms of how to foster more successful cooperation. Yeah, and this type of cooperation can include monitoring and reporting, but can also include different sectors and different levels of government and societal partners. So on your screen, you have just a reminder here on the material flow impact pathway of marine plastic pollution. And clearly there are actors that are not listed on that screen, but that are attached to these different levels of production, consumption, and disposal, and also these different activities, whether it's illegal dumping, whether it's looking at landfill management, whether it's looking at emissions. So the two key questions that I'd like to put to the floor for all of you is how can coordination mechanisms, including monitoring and reporting, but not excluding others, be made more effective with other partners and stakeholders whose initiatives maintain similar goals? And how can regional and international development partners and intergovernmental organizations better support more effective cooperation? If you'll allow me from ESCAP side, I think one of the key lessons learned we have on our work on marine plastic pollution is the need to set up specific mechanisms at the local level because local governments have the assigned functional responsibility for waste management, but that those are aligned with national marine litter action plans that many of the ASEAN member states have produced or are in the process of producing, but that also we use that to ensure policy coherence at the regional level through the ASEAN working groups. And finally, from ESCAP side, one of the key lessons learned, because we are engaging in the city space, we know that there is the need for spatial coordination. That is, with municipalities upstream and downstream from rivers, because we know that plastic waste value chains do not correspond to the administrative boundaries in countries. And then finally, I would say the third lesson learned from ESCAP is that the need to harmonize basic definitions in terms of hotspot mapping and standardizing methodological techniques for data collection, so that we are comparing apples with apples, within the country, across municipalities, but also across different countries in Southeast Asia. So thank you very much for indulging me a little bit to get the conversation started. Please do raise your hand if you'd like to, answer any of those two questions around cooperation and coordination, either from your initiatives or initiatives that you've been a part of. What are some of the good practices and solutions to enhance cooperation and coordination for more effective marine litter management? The floor is open. The questions, thank you, are now placed in the chat box. Maybe I can help me break the ice a little bit with my colleague Crispin Lau from the Philippines and the work at the national level on solid waste management. Yesterday you spoke quite a bit around the coordination you've done with municipalities. Oh, I see you're in the car, sir. Perhaps you'd like to just give a little bit of lessons learned to the group on how you actually create that effective whole of government approach in the Philippines around plastic waste management from your institution.
Well, I think it goes beyond local government units. Local government units is one component, one aspect that you need to tap. What's more important is to develop areas of collaboration and cooperation across the whole stakeholder chain. Of course, from the industries, from at the local level, you can have the businesses working with local governments, and at the national level, you can have across all the chain, so that you can have a more comprehensive approach And I think we have successfully done that when we developed the National Plan of Action, taking in all the inputs from all sectors so that we can develop and come up with a national plan of action that determines who does what, when, and how do you finance it.
Excellent, thank you. I think what you're saying is quite important, taking all of the actors within different sectors, horizontally as well as vertically across the different value chain in the Philippines. I think it's a really good lesson learned for all of us. The floor is open in case you'd like to raise your hand to contribute, or you could just speak.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. This is Klaus
Hi, Klaus.
From Second News and the Ocean Plastic Prevention Accelerator project in Surabaya. So from our experience, of what we recently actually have learned and discovered, is that one effective coordination mechanism for several actors could be, so we're still exploring this and verifying it, it could be like certification mechanisms for ocean-bound plastics. So and this doesn't only include that the plastic is ocean-bound, which usually specifies a certain area in terms of distance from the shore, but also things like ethical practices and traceability, and for effectively ruling out practices such as child labor, unsafe working environments, and similar. And actually, there is already some demand from large brands and buyers for supply that meets these standards, and there are organizations that certify them as well. And it's more like about now making these structures cost effective, because right now it is just more costly to trace all these things than just using virgin plastic. So the competitive pricing is not really there, or not really there yet. So it's about making the certification mechanisms as large as possible, so scaling them, so to bring down costs. I think it's also about governments adopting some form of standardized certification mechanism, or guidelines, baseline standards, so to actually have people adhere to that, and then also, of course, require the producers to use a certain amount of these types of materials. And I think if this is implemented correctly, there is a large potential of bringing together several stakeholders around this issue, and for kind of seeing these certification mechanisms as a strong force that can create coordination and cooperation.
Thank you, Klaus. What was interesting for me is we're speaking about coordination and cooperation in this group, but what you said was really important also for the financing group and the policy group. So, really, I think we need to look at all three of these issues and three of the outcomes of these groups, as in an integrated way. So thank you for that, Klaus. Floor is open. If any other colleagues, including would like to reflect, around coordination at the regional level. We are, speaking about ASEAN and Southeast Asia in this meeting. Perhaps, yeah, please, Crispin, again, please go ahead.
Yeah. Okay. Let me add to that. I think there is an opportunity also for collaboration and cooperation among ASEAN. This cross-cuts with policy, but if we are to develop standards for recycling, for recycled materials and recyclable materials, then it helps the whole system. What's important is you need to collaborate to understand the needs of the local setting, and then taking it off to an ASEAN so that you can develop an ASEAN standard using the same market. Just to add to that.
Thank you. That's an important point. I see Natalia from ASEAN Secretariat. You've unmuted yourself. Would you like to weigh in on the topic of the importance of regional cooperation on this issue?
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you very much for sharing your views and also some information earlier during this dialogue. For ASEAN, we feel that coordination mechanism is certainly very important. We see a lot of initiatives already on marine debris, and we don't want to see any duplication. So for ASEAN, we try to have a coordination platform, for example, regularly with partners and sectoral bodies, because ASEAN has a lot of many different sectoral bodies, and marine debris is very cross-cutting. So we try to bring in together these various sectoral bodies in a regular meeting to exchange views and information to make sure that we are abreast of the developments from other partners. I see it also some other partners, for example, like ESCAP also has under the Closing the Loop has this project advisory committee, which we think also very good because it also provides a platform for all of us to share our inputs to the project. But I think also it will be important to increase or promote more knowledge management, because aside from the meetings and the dialogue platform, knowledge management would be important. So then it will be more permanent and available for all partners and stakeholders to access. For example, like on marine debris monitoring, I believe there are more than one initiatives in the region trying to address this problem. If we have more centralized knowledge management platform, it would be good. I'm from ASEAN side, and also I think with the support from Japan, they are establishing the knowledge management center on marine plastic debris. I think it's a good start, and we hope to see more information collected and be made useful for all the partners in the region. So we think that it's one of the important aspects in this coordination mechanism. Thank you.
Thank you, Natalia. Indeed, ASEAN Secretariat area, which is supporting the Regional Knowledge Center for Marine Plastic Debris in Southeast Asia. They're all engaged with us in our Project Advisory Committee, which helps us to not reinvent the wheel, but actually build synergies and build on each other's work. You know, if I can ask a follow-up question, Natalia, on the point around knowledge management and data repositories, you know, on this issue, what would be some of the key types of knowledge and data that you would see as important as driving regional cooperation and coordination in ASEAN on this issue? What would you prioritize for that?
I think for one is the data and the information on what would be the existing initiatives, projects, and the project database, if you might call it, like what are the different organizations and countries are taking on. But aside from that, then maybe also more technical data with in relation to the marine debris itself, you know, the results of monitoring and others, like for example, the result of Closing the Loop project on the monitoring of the marine debris hotspots. Then the information can be the inputs to that knowledge repository, and then other partners or stakeholders can build onto those information. Also, if I may add to the earlier comment about the standards, as part of our initiative to develop regional action plan on marine debris, we are also talking about the possibility of having a more harmonized, guidelines on moving toward that direction, having a more harmonized standards. Although it might be early, but we think that regional organizations like ASEAN could have a role in moving into that direction, but by supporting, for example, like developing reference or guidelines for this kind of harmonized standards. Also, we are discussing on the possibility of establishing an ASEAN circular economy stakeholder platform. So we want to bring in more than the governments, but also the other stakeholders like private sector, innovators, and others. So we have a broader platform for this. Thank you.
Thank you, Natalia. In fact, ASEAN is doing a lot to support the regional cooperation and coordination on this issue. So thank you for that. The floor is open again for other colleagues to weigh in on this issue on more effective regional cooperation from development partners, intergovernmental organizations, or perhaps in your country or in your locality, some lessons learned in terms of how we make this more effective across sectors and across different stakeholders. Colleagues from Indonesia, Malaysia, other ASEAN member states, please feel free to share any experiences that you might have on this. Okay. Maybe I can ask my colleague Alex, who is here. Could you share a little bit on how the Closing the Loop project is coordinating around this issue of data and hotspot mapping within different countries, and how we're supporting more coherent approaches there through that project, if you'd like to share some information.
Yeah, sure. So with Closing the Loop, so as already mentioned, we have our project advisory committee. So we have 15 different organizations that are active in the marine plastic sector in the region. And this is an opportunity for us as we go to provide technical review and verification for some of our methods, which I think is really important. Because we want to make sure that not only we're not just sharing information, it's also, it's a flow of collaboration opportunity and solutions, and also finance potentially. We're also looking next year to be starting our action planning phase, which is going to be working with the local city governments. So the key part of this is ensuring multi-stakeholder and participatory mechanisms. So in some of the cities it varies a bit, but I think really interesting aspect to that is looking at digital readiness and civic partnership through that. So Surabaya, for example, have a Musrembang system where local governments can get feedback from the specific communities. So we'll be hoping to leverage some of these, as well as developing workshops in order to work with the existing policy processes which are ongoing in each different city, because I think it's important to appreciate that when you're working, especially in multiple different countries, there are different policy planning processes, and rather than just making sure that your policy recommendations are closely aligned with what already exists rather than something potentially new, which I think is important. I'd also mention just the role of the informal sector, particularly, especially around Southeast Asia is very important to engage with, and there are several civic society organisations which will have experience with in the past. So WeGo, for example, work on women in informal employment, and then capacity building as well. So ensuring that the local partners have an understanding of, if they want to set up these coordination mechanisms, how they can do that. And the Closing the Loop project will, in the new year, be releasing an online learning course aimed at practitioners, as well as to contribute to the wider knowledge. So I know UNEP also have a MOOC as well. So that's a few of the things we're doing on cooperation.
Thanks, Alex, for sharing some insights from ESCAP's work there. Colleagues, we also, Alex brought up a good point about cooperation and coordination at the community level, across different community groups, informal as well as formal, along the plastic waste value chain. Are there any experience that you'd like to share with us in terms of effective coordination at the community level, with different civil society groups, with different stakeholders, that help to achieve these broader aims of cooperation nationally and regionally. Perhaps I could ask Director Tahar from Indonesia, experience in working with community coordination and cooperation from Ministry of Environment and Forest side in Indonesia. Or other colleagues, just feel free to unmute yourself. We're not a very big group here, and take the floor.
I'll also add it'd be useful to understand some of the challenges which partners have faced in establishing these communication and coordination mechanisms. You know, are there any particular groups which we struggle to engage with, and how did you go about overcoming that?
Yes, Director Tahar, over to you.
Hello, Omar.
Yeah, I can hear you. Please go ahead.
Yep. Thank you. I'm Nofrizal Tahar from Indonesia. Good afternoon. Yeah, I will inform you about the collaboration of the community in Indonesia. We have a local initiative we call the Waste Bank. Indonesia is now Waste Bank is very popular in Indonesia. We have maybe more than 10,000 units of the Waste Bank in Indonesia. This is the initiative like community development. All the household separate the waste, plastic waste, paper waste, and after that they collect in the one site. The call is the waste bank. So they give the voucher, they give the money from the collectors. This is I think this is the good good practice, best good practice in Indonesia. This is a cultural movement. I think we can share to the other countries about the experience of the West Bank in Indonesia. Thank you, Omar.
Thank you, Director Tahar. If I could ask a follow-up question, you know, the waste banks, it's quite an innovative example of this community-based financing approach and mobilization approach for segregation and management of waste in Indonesia, certainly in large cities like Surabaya. From your perspective at the Ministry of Environment and Forestry managing the solid waste management portfolio there, how have you created sort of a enabling policy environment so that those waste banks can flourish and can cooperate with government and other partners?
Yes, we already have the regulation for the West Bank, especially for West Bank, generally about the 3R. So we have an umbrella for the West Bank in Indonesia. First, the second, now we have a new regulation about the extended producer responsibility. So West Bank can cooperate with the producer to take back packaging, something like that. So I think it's the good progress in Indonesia. Thank you, Omar.
Thank you for those really practical examples on how that policy environment can support cooperation with producers and other actors on the plastic waste value chain for waste banks. colleagues, please feel free to also share some of the experiences on the challenges and mechanisms that you have put in place in your countries to ensure effective coordination, cooperation with a variety of stakeholders. I'm sure all of us have faced this in our work, and any lessons learned, good practices on how to make these cooperation mechanisms work. What were the challenges? Please feel free to share those with the group.
Omar, maybe can I come in, please?
Absolutely, please, Stefanos, yeah.
Thanks, Omar. I mean, ideally, I should not intervene. You're asking the countries here, but just to share an experience from working around 11 years in this region and having seen different areas of work that we indeed need cooperation and coordination. For me, the success is that it starts from a leader at the country level. And then this is the leader that it brings everybody together. So, and I would say one, probably even reflecting to some mistakes we do as UN agencies or as international organizations or as our NGOs, we try to have multiple entry points in the country. And we don't do this because we just want to have multiple entry points, but because we have an agony actually, and we want to be sure that we can reach out to as many as possible. But at this point, we might even create some confusion, having one part of the UN talking to a ministry, another part talking to another ministry, a third part talking to a stakeholder. And I think we need to find in all these cases who is the leader, who is the opinion leader that we need to focus, and then ask this opinion leader to involve the other national stakeholder, government entities, private sector, and everybody. So identifying and coaching, I think this leader is very important. So it's not probably always necessary to identify multiple entry points, and we try to bring them together, but identify who is the national entry point that can bring everybody together. And sometimes this needs a lot of exercise because this entry point could be quite high in the echelon, but sometimes it could be just an entry point that has a big leverage. So we have seen in some countries that having an association of the private sector bringing the issue into the government can work very well. In some others could be some NGOs. In some thirds could be a pivotal ministry. So that's what I wanted to share, that having a leader and then all of us, UN agencies, knowledge-based organizations, think tanks, supporting and empowering this leader to bring the others around the table could be a success solution. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Stefanos. That's a really interesting example, and I think one we can all learn from about, finding those specific champions, those leaders, as you called it, and coordinating around them to avoid multiple entry points, creating kind of confusion with government partners. I've certainly seen that happen before from my time in the UN. Colleagues, would any reflections on that, on this issue of finding this particular leader champion for us to be able to coordinate effectively? Has that approach also resonated with you in your work in coordinating marine plastic litter? Perhaps if I could ask a colleague from Malaysia, Najiha, any experience you'd like to share from Malaysia's side in what are some of the key ingredients of effective coordination on this issue? Or colleagues, please also feel free to put your questions or inputs into the chat box, or just take the floor. Perhaps Joanna from Sweden, from the perspective of a development partner, supporter of this initiative. How have you supported or seen the importance of coordination and cooperation on this issue?
Hi, thank you for your question. Can you hear me?
I can, yes, please go ahead.
Great, thank you. So, well, we are engaged in regional work in Sweden around the Baltic Sea and the Northeast Atlantic, and I think that has helped us a lot to have regional seas conventions that are really engaged, and also having them as platform for countries to talk to each other. So I think that regional action plans are a really good way to cooperate between countries. If that is an answer to your question. Thank you.
Thank you, indeed. And we've seen this effectiveness also in the Southeast Asian region, but also in other regions in the Pacific Islands, for example, this importance of regional platforms, regional action plans to bring in all of those actors under a coherent framework of action, and exploring also these kind of joint programming, joint cooperation activities under those has really been key. So thank you. I completely agree with that. Colleagues, please feel free also to share any of your experiences on the regional cooperation angle with different platforms that you have come across that you think are quite effective, that could be replicated with different actors around this issue. I see colleagues from Vietnam have also joined us, Mrs. Ong. Varen Vongpach has also joined. If you'd like to share some experiences from your institution on effective coordination, what are some of the key ingredients for success?
Well, thank you very much. We cannot say it's a success yet, but we are a good start. There we cooperate along the coastal villages or also the students to provide the knowledge how to protect the coastal environment by bringing up the marine debris or the litter that we found along the beach, and then we have a clean up campaign for every how to say special or important holiday for Thailand in order to increase the awareness. And also we try to how to say to increase or to contribute the knowledge we found based on the scientific study, to talk to the villager or the fisherman that what kind of the debris that we found in the sea, like the fishing gear or the some litter that based on their consume, like the single-use plastic or even the plastic bottle, and they can collect it and separate it and earn some money from that kind of the recycled items. And also the one that may be less value or even no one interesting, you can separate in order to keep your hand to protect the environment, something like that. And also the next step, maybe we can talk with the fishermen how to collect some losing fishing gear. I don't know, maybe it's still under study how to manage it, because the fishing gear that affect to the marine environment is not caused by intention, it's by accident. And also even though we have a campaign to collect the underwater garbage or underwater litter from the marine ecosystem, but we still facing that it increased number of the garbage every year. that maybe we need to digging more what cause of all of the garbage that go to the underwater, something like that. Maybe that's all from my side.
Thank you, Kun Wongpanich. Just a follow-up question from my side. You know, understanding what are some of the ways that you were able to coordinate this across different communities along the coastline, these actions, and then how did you also connect those communities or you know their needs to people in power, to decision makers in local government or other sectors?
Well, because we start from many years from maybe from the land-based source or from the solid waste management, and also we have a quite good lesson, and also we give a kind of the what you call a reward or is a good example or success example in some village and showcase to the other, and then it's a kind of inspiration to another community that would like to get reward or get this kind of thing to say that they also help the country to protect the environment. They also help their future also. Some this kind of how to say, to inspire the other from the good lesson. So, I hope that I answer. Sure.
Thank you very much. I mean, showing those inspiring examples really sounded like it helped just to scale up cooperation in Thailand in your work. We have a input from Najiha from Malaysia saying her microphone is not working. Could you try again? I've asked you to unmute, so you'll just have to unmute and click yes. Try one more time. You were unmuted for a second, Najiha. You'll just have to click yes. Okay, well, while maybe we're having some technical difficulties, just to share a point from Malaysia, their research institute is trying to provide baseline data for microplastics and marine debris surrounding Malaysia. They're cooperating with public universities and other government institutions through sampling in rural places. They're also trying to educate villagers of improper littering. And they noticed that if publics are more aware of the numbers of debris and plastics and how they're increasing, it's also making a threat to food security. So they're really concerned and trying to do their best to prevent contamination from plastics and debris by bringing together those government, university, and public actors. Thank you for sharing that in the chat. Colleagues, we have about 6 minutes left, especially for any colleagues that haven't taken the floor or made a contribution around some of the key ingredients for successful coordination and cooperation on this issue. We'd really like to hear from you. Perhaps under the Osaka Blue Ocean Vision or other types of global platforms from Japan, Sho Nakamura, would you like to share a bit of information in terms of how you are ensuring this from Japan side? Please go ahead.
Hello, my name is Sho Nakamura. I'm glad to attend this breakout session. But I mean, I'm from the permanent delegation of Japan to the OECD, so maybe I cannot share my view as a Japan representative. But I mean, I was in charge of the marine litter issue several years ago in the Ocean Environment Office of Ministry of the Environment, Japan, and also I was related to the Osaka Blue Ocean Mission as one of the official in Ministry of the Environment. So maybe based on such viewpoint, I mean, so my personal comment would be based on that experiences, and I really understand the importance of the regional cooperation and coordination based on the scientific knowledge. As the distinguished delegates from Vietnam said, and I think what Japan is doing right now is such kind of coordination, I mean, and cooperation in terms of the international cooperation issue based on the scientific knowledge and sharing the monitoring and data with the same direction. And also what I felt was that I think what the Dr. Fototu has just been said is also important. I mean, because of this, very diverse nature of the marine plastic pollution problem, I really understand there would be multiple entry points in each national, each countries, because let's say, I mean, the ocean itself is very diverse nature, as I don't even have to explain it. I mean, ocean is full of species, and the ocean relates to fisheries and regional problem and everything, and coastal management. So I mean, ocean itself has a traditional culture and traditional cooperation and coordination mechanism within the countries. And also, of course, in Japan, ocean itself has its own, coordination mechanism already before the marine plastic, pollution problem has been raised. I mean, like this. And also the waste management itself has very diverse nature itself, from the upstream to downstream. I mean, there have already been some kind of coordination mechanism related to the waste management itself. I mean, even if that the marine litter or marine plastic pollution problem has getting raised, I mean, before such problem has been getting raised. So I mean, it's very important to use that kind of traditional or cooperation mechanism from the various viewpoints, including ocean or waste management or such kind of, I mean, various viewpoints. Using that traditional mechanism would also one of the good ways of progressing the way forward in terms of the marine plastic pollution problem. Thank you.
Thank you, Nakamura-san. That's a very helpful perspective from Japan. And, I think it's really important to have that coherence across the national solid waste management plans, the marine litter plans, because there's so much overlap across them. But again, to find that that single entry point of that leader, as Stefanos mentioned, is really important to have that kind of coherent approach. So colleagues, we have about 2 minutes left to wrap up this session. And any other colleagues that'd like to share their challenges, their obstacles, but also some of their solutions and opportunities that they see moving forward for better cooperation, coordination on this marine plastic issue, please feel free to either write those in the chat or take the floor before we go to the coffee break. Please go ahead, Johanna.
Thank you. So I would just like to start to say thank you for the possibility to be in this meeting. I think it has been very interesting to learn that a lot of the problems are the same throughout the regions. And I think it is really important that I think the lessons learned is that we have to work on all the levels, local, national, regional, and global. But it is very important to clarify our responsibilities on different levels in order to make our collaboration more effective. Thank you.
Indeed, I think it's important, Johanna, to understand what not only the division of labor, but the strategic value and the resources at different levels, and that landscape of different actors, while they're all connected, can be quite different. So that's important. Great. We have time for, I think, one more intervention. If any other colleagues would like to take the floor, or maybe I could ask Natalia from ASEAN Secretariat, what would be some of your key takeaways from this discussion?
Thank you. I think we heard a lot of good inputs, and for example, like the leadership, as Dr. Stefanos mentioned earlier. I highlighted earlier about knowledge management. I think that there are definitely coordination is important, and we need to strengthen this, and also at the national level and the regional level.
Thank you, Natalia. And we've run out of time. So my job will be to sum up this very rich discussion, which is not one that will be very easy, but I'd like to thank you on behalf of UNESCAP and the organizing partners for your frank views and inspiring solutions on cooperation and coordination, and see you after the coffee break in the plenary. So thank you very much again. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Hi, Enrico, are you back?
Hi, Christina. Yes,
Okay, good. I just wanted to check the sound. Thank you.
no worries.
Okay, welcome back everyone. Christina, are we good to go from the back in plenary?
Yes, we're good to go.
Okay, for some reason I can't see the participants in my view, but maybe that's my own technical failings here. But anyway, I'm glad that everyone is back. I hope everyone had a productive and constructive discussion in their breakout groups. I understand that one breakout group managed to keep going right through the virtual coffee break, and that is a very good sign. So the plan is now that we will hear back from the facilitators in each of the breakout groups. It'll be from Yuka and followed by myself, and then Omar with the three to provide feedback on the three groups. And so let me just make sure we have this sorted out. So Yuka, are you okay to, have you had a chance to gather your thoughts on breakout group number 1? And can I hand the floor to you to distill the essence of your discussions?
I will do my best. I think ours was the dedicated group that worked through the coffee break. So the time for distillation has been modest, but I think I'm helped with good notes from my note taker. So let me give it a try. With great thanks to the group, of course, for great input and interesting discussion. And I'll just give you a flavor of some of the things that were raised. We had interventions from a range of different entities, development partners, including OECD, ASEAN Secretariat, ourselves, COBSEA Secretariat, and of course, from several countries sharing national level experiences, very concrete policy context, very concrete stages of planning, as well as challenges faced in relation to that. So I think we have very useful material for some follow-up here. We touched on the issue of EPR to begin with, getting the ball rolling on the discussion, recognizing that extended producer responsibility is by now a somewhat proven tool, but that there are some issues around rolling it out in this region that require quite close consideration, including the fact that we need to balance the environmental and economic and social objectives very, very carefully, and not, how should I say, assign an implicit priority between them, but rather ensure that social objectives are fully met within the process of setting up EPR, and allowing the integration or the building on the informal sector as it will need to be in this region, and ensuring that over time it strengthens also their lot and doesn't undermine their well-being. So some very useful comments on that I think many can relate to here. We heard from Myanmar, from Malaysia, from Cambodia on national level planning progress, and how the policy frameworks have evolved from relatively sort of traditional and sectoral approaches, and of course adapting them to current needs, including adapting waste management plans to also address hazardous waste, COVID-19 waste, and so on. But in that context, the need for really doing solid stakeholder awareness raising and building an informed public to create space for these policy frameworks. Also a clear recognition that we often need a much more holistic understanding of the plastic life cycle, and better information on that material flows, better evidence effectively to inform further policy efforts. We spoke about coordination and alignment across ministries, bearing in mind that, as we said yesterday and today several times, marine litter plastic pollution, it sort of transcends the entirety of society. Different elements of this challenge will have to be dealt with in different places. To some extent, we must compartmentalize the problem as well as our responses. At the same time, we need to ensure that those different compartments actually connect in a meaningful way. And from Malaysia, we had some very concrete examples of how federal government versus state level government sometimes leads to incoherence or inconsistencies. For example, the federal mandates not uptaken uniformly across the states, as well as, of course, the fact that much waste management is vested within local authorities that don't always have the full ability, whether technical or financial or otherwise, to implement. And so the specific example here was in relation to plastic waste collection and recycling rates in Malaysia, where obstacles to increasing recycling rates related not necessarily to an absence of a policy mandate to sort and collect waste, but rather that it wasn't uniformly adopted across the country, and putting in place a number of challenges in that respect. There was a significant discussion on the need for stakeholder engagement and information sharing to inform the development of effective measures, and recognition that different stages of development of measures require different types of stakeholders to engage and different forms of stakeholder engagement. And to some extent, there is, of course, a utility of guidelines and tools, but they need to perhaps be sensitive to those contexts. Let me glance at my notes again. Yeah, we spoke quite a lot about data and information. And while much is being done on the basis of existing data, while there are a wide range of efforts to strengthen data overall, it's clear that we have to continue to develop data on all parts of the plastic value chain and all parts of the plastics life cycle, and make those different data speak to each other, bring them together in a good way. And so I spoke a little bit about work through COBSEA in relation to marine litter monitoring. We heard from ASEAN Secretariat a very valid point on the need for not putting the data too far outside an integrated planning context, and indeed establishing data systems and monitoring systems that are explicitly linked into the policy formulation process, so as to make sure that it's fit for purpose, and also the uptake is most immediate and direct. In that context, of course, clear recognition that there is global, regional, national, and subnational dimensions to this, and while we can establish certain monitoring and certain kinds of data in line with already existing global standards or recommended standards, we also need to be sensitive to what any given context requires here, and we must use the existing institutional and capacity framework there to generate data. So waste management data has to come out of the waste management institutions and systems that exist here. And there are obviously a number of things that still need to happen in that arena. We received some good updates on existing or emerging efforts to create policy development tools, or to support countries select and adapt the right policy tools, and clearly some interest in that respect. And let me see where we get towards the end. Yeah, the point about, of course, arriving at this coherence across efforts. Really, we heard both yesterday and today of the range of initiatives that are working across all the countries participating here, or a subset of them in different ways. And maybe this is partly a personal reflection, but also clearly a outcome of the discussions here, is that at the national level, there's a duty, if you wish, to ensure that these multiple different processes really connect and become coherent at the national level. And at the same time, that duty, the burden of ensuring coherence and not fragmentation is as high, if not higher, on the multilateral agencies, on the financing institutions, and so on. So I think we all acknowledge that there's a good foundation, there's an excellent basis for such collaboration, and there's still some way to go to making more of what we have. And I just, having said that, I realized the last point I didn't mention was, of course, this point of financing, which be interesting to hear from the other groups what comes out on that. But obviously, even for the development of policy, and certainly for the implementation of policy, we need to ensure that there is the financial readiness and preparedness to put means at the disposal of governments and other players, and that this should not be the burden purely on government, and that we have the opportunity to really build much more partnerships of a different kind, either by creating policy space for private sector to take on a bigger role and generating genuine investment opportunities, or otherwise using fiscal incentives to promote the change we need to see. So I will stop there, having spoken a bit too long, but I think we had a very interesting discussion, and I hope our notes will help us with a slightly more coherent summary in the final report. And apologies to group members if I have missed some important points, but I'm sure they are captured. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jyrki. Thank you very much, Jyrki. That's very coherent and very rich summary. So we look forward to writing that up and pulling it together even more so. I guess there's an opportunity for members of Breakout Group 1, if they felt that there were additional points that they'd like to raise now. Now would be a good time to do so. If you put your hand up in the Zoom thing, there's an opportunity now. If you feel that Jyrki has misrepresented anything or has missed out anything, please don't hesitate to do so. But I don't see any hands going up at this point in time. So Jyrki, thank you very much. That was a fantastic summary, and it looks like you had a discussion that justified passing up your coffee break. Well done, well done. So I will now pass the floor to myself, and I moderated the Breakout Group 2, which covered the issue of financing. We also had a very rich discussion, and I'd like to thank our note takers, Kate and Jeffrey and Andrew, who diligently took notes of all the discussion. So I'll try and pull together some points here, and of course my colleagues in the Breakout Group 2, please don't hesitate to jump in after I finish speaking if you feel that I haven't fully captured some of the points that you've made, or come to us in writing afterwards. So it's one of the overarching things that became clear during our discussion around financing is that there is a need to distinguish the different stages of the plastic life cycle to reflect the different business models that are required to try and drive plastics reduction in those different stages, to drive innovation, to drive change. In the early stage, the design stage, and the production stage, there is a good case to be made for the public sector taking on perhaps a greater risk-sharing burden in order to drive the innovation and to try and increase the pace of innovation at this early stage. And then when we move into the consumption and the disposal phases, then different financing models come into play, and the risk sharing between the public and the private sector, the risk appetite can change quite dramatically across these stages. And this came through very clearly when we started talking about the innovation dimension, not just the innovation in terms of the design of plastics, but innovation around the consumption of plastic, the way in which consumers either take up recycling opportunities or not, and the way in which disposal takes place. And just to drill down a little in those, we had some great examples of in the consumption phase of the way in which public finance incentives, or even the threat of finance incentives, can change people's behaviors in the way in which they use and dispose of plastics. A good example was put forward by a European initiative called Cup Club, which was a digital platform that encourages the reuse, the recycling of coffee cups. Has suffered a little from the COVID experience, but then there was another example put in place that was put forward of what was called a latte levy, where a threat of a high levy on a disposable coffee cup was enough to incentivize change at the consumption level there, and this spurred financing into the circular model of in this particular area. It's a bit niche, but I think the lesson there is the linkages between the incentives provided by different financing models in terms of public interventions, and then the link to the behavioral changes that this can introduce are quite clear. The other thing that came up very strongly, and there was a lot of discussion, was around the enabling environment. And two things stood out here. One was the importance of roadmaps, and roadmaps at a national level and roadmaps at a regional level. And these provide a lot more certainty, a lot more understanding amongst both public and private actors of the direction of travel for countries and the region in terms of their attitudes, their approaches to recycling. And this can then alter the risk profile, the risk appetite that countries have, that private investors have, and this can help to drive the required investment. The other dimension in terms of the enabling environment, which we spent a bit of time on, was the role of standards. And standards can drive investment. They create a particular direction for the enabling environment or for the government action that can be very important. Can be very important for helping to indicate which areas the government would, or in which the private sector can make a profitable business model going forward. Let me just check my notes here. There is also some role for a mission innovation type approach, where these big investments in upfront sustainable design of plastic can help to drive investment in this early stage that may not be very suitable for private investment, but may be more suitable for either for government investment or philanthropic foundations to come in. The last point I would make is that, oh, sorry, two more points. One is there was further discussion around EPRs, the role of EPRs and modulated fees in designing, in driving in investment and creating the public appetite for more EPRs and trying to sort out the financing mechanisms there. And finally, there's clear that there's no one-size-fits-all business model here. And the point was made that there is a unique island dimension here, and that there is a need to identify how a business model for recycling plastic needs to be modified or adjusted to take account of the island situations, which is very predominant in the Southeast Asian region, compared to, say, an urban recycling business model. So I will leave it there, and then I can give the opportunity to my colleagues in breakout group 2 if they wanted to raise any additional points or. Okay, I don't see any hands going up. So I will now pass it over to Omar, who can take us through the feedback from breakout group number 3.
Thank you very much, Anthony. I had a great time with my group. It was a very diverse group, lots of different views and perspectives around how do we make effective cooperation. So the two questions that we were grappling with and came up with some very specific suggestions were, how can coordination mechanisms be made more effective, including with other partners and stakeholders whose initiatives maintain similar goals? And then how can regional and international development partners and intergovernmental organizations support more effective cooperation? So I think we all agreed that cooperation is a good thing, but that in practice, it's much more complicated and it needs much more strategic attention. We are really privileged to hear from colleagues in Indonesia, Malaysia, the Philippines, Thailand, Japan, and Sweden, but also regional actors such as ASEAN Secretariat and ESCAP. So if I can kind of cluster, I would say, the perspectives, I would have 4 topics that kind of emerged. One was around coordinated data collection and harmonization. The second was around policy coherence. The third was a really practical, very important example around certification mechanisms and coordination around that. And then the fourth, I would say, is leadership matters. So let me just discuss each of those 4 in turn. And then maybe my other colleagues from the group can also supplement if I missed anything. So on monitoring and coordination around data collection, this was really seen as fundamental for the identification and comparability of key plastic waste hotspots around the plastic waste value chain, where action is really most necessary, given all of these scary scenarios that we've heard over the last couple of days around the level of plastic that's forecast to go into our marine as well as terrestrial environments. Harmonization of collected data and the definitions needed to ensure that it's comparable across cities, across countries and regions, was highlighted quite a bit, so that we're comparing apples and apples and oranges when needed, as well as better knowledge management. And on this, we really saw the ASEAN Regional Marine Litter Center as a good practice example at that regional level that could be supported and scaled up. Okay, topic 2, policy coherence. So we looked at this across the entire plastic waste value chain, public and private, informal and formal, all vital to be included for coherent approaches. And 2 particular areas that are probably relevant for the policy group as well were around coherence around the national solid waste management plans and marine litter plans, particularly for around land-based marine litter, and the institutional actors associated with each. So we have different line ministries ministries, ministries of environment, ministries of local government and urban development, each having a stake in that. And sometimes coordination and cooperation isn't as forthcoming as it can be, especially at the local level. And despite different levels of decentralization in our region, the assigned functional responsibility for waste management does sit with local government in, I think, all of our countries. So really engaging them for that policy coherence around solid waste management and marine litter planning was seen as vital. And then following on that theme at the local level, we also talked about spatial coordination, upstream and downstream, for example, of rivers of different administrations. And so there's a disparity between the administrative boundaries and the hydrological, ecological systems that influence how different types of plastic waste items are transmitted into either rivers as ocean-bound plastic or directly into seas themselves. So we really need to build on and engage with existing coordination networks in this effort, and particularly the ASEAN working groups and related mechanisms were really highlighted here. Third topic, which was quite interesting, was the increasing demand for certification mechanisms for ocean-bound plastics. So not only certifying that it's coming from the oceans, but also to coordinate with across sectors that certifies ethical practices in plastic waste recovery. Scaling certification schemes and mechanisms for competitive pricing was seen as really important, and that governments have a really, kind of are in the driver's seat, I would say, to approve these certification and standards and require producers to use a certain amount of recyclable materials. And it was seen that these certification mechanisms can really help to crowd in the necessary cooperation, coordination that's needed to make a difference. And then the last and fourth example, which I called Leadership Matters, because of the diverse nature of the issue, the institutional fragmentation around this, overlapping mandates, different sectors coming together across a very complex value chain, there are naturally multiple entry points in every country around this issue. So we found that it's important to early identify a national entry point. We call this a leader, a champion, or a key focal point in the country, and ensure that there's a coordinated approach around that key entry point to avoid confusion, which can be caused by communicating with a number of different actors simultaneously on the same issue. So I'll leave it there, and I'm sure I've left many things out, but I had a really lively group that I'm sure can also supplement. So thank you, Anthony, and back to you.
Thank you, Omar, and great summary. Great summary. Very concise and comprehensive at the same time. Are there any colleagues from Group 3 who would like to supplement what Omar has been saying? And it's always hard in these Zoom meetings to see who wants to speak. And I'm just going through here. No one's got their hands up. So Omar, I think you did a great job there. So we appreciate that. And so I guess that that brings us to the end of the of this plenary report back session. What we're going to do next is, in terms of the next steps from this particular session, is we will pull together in written form all the summaries and key messages from the different breakout groups along those three axes that we identified in terms of the policy coherence and coordination, the finance dimension, and the governance dimension. So we will be pulling that together and then reflecting with our partners in this dialogue on the next steps in terms of developing a policy guidance to help countries in the region and elsewhere to address this nexus between marine plastic pollution, policy coherence, and finance. So with that, I'll close session 4, and I'd like to thank all our facilitators, our note takers, and our technical staff for very competently getting us into the breakout groups, conducting the breakout groups, and reporting back. We very much appreciate the great efforts and the hard work that's been put in to make this happen. So miraculously, colleagues, we are ahead of our schedule, and so it gives me great pleasure to move towards our closing dialogue, where we will have a presentation to provide some reflective thoughts to wrap up our two-day policy dialogue. And I'm very pleased to introduce Mr. Novrizal Tahar, who is the Director of Solid Waste Management in the Ministry of Environment and Forestry in Indonesia. Novrizal has a huge responsibility in this role, and we very much look forward to hearing from him the insights in terms of how Indonesia is addressing the solid waste management question, and the links to the discussion around that we've been having the last 2 days on marine plastic pollution. Novrizal, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Anthony. Distinguished speakers, guests, and participants, a very good afternoon to you all. Thank you for having me. It is a great pleasure to meet you all and to participate and contribute to this important dialogue. First of all, please allow me to use this opportunity to highlight what is happening in Indonesia with regard to plastic waste. Also, I believe my colleagues from Indonesia have given you some illustration in their presentation yesterday. In the past 10 years, along with the economic growth, the amount and the composition of plastic waste are growing rapidly as the consumption pattern changed a lot. In 2010, plastic waste contribute 11% to our waste, and it rise up to 17% in 2020. Even based on recent research by ITS, a leading university in Surabaya, it grow more rapid in megacity Surabaya as the plastic waste there reached the highest percentage, 20%. With no extraordinary policy and effort, we predict the contribution of plastic waste will increase by 35 until 40% in 2050. To solve the complexity of plastic pollution, the government should develop an integrated and consistent policy and regulation from upstream to downstream, including single-use plastic ban and phase-out policy. Up till November 2020, there are 2 provinces and 39 cities and regencies that implement the single-use plastic ban policy, mostly plastic shopping bag. Upstream policy is focusing on strengthening and broadening waste minimization program action by the community through waste living and waste segregation and treatment at source, as well as implementing the extended producer responsibility through the roadmap of waste reduction implementation by producer that stipulated in the regulation concerning roadmap of waste reduction by the producer. Midstream and downstream policy are focusing on 2 things. Firstly, applying circular economy model through enhancing proper collection and recycling system, especially closed-loop recycling, as well as reusing packaging business. Secondly, to develop and apply a proper environmentally friendly technology for waste to energy or waste to electricity. In the context of circular economy enhancement, at this moment, Ministry of Environment and Policy, in collaboration with Ministry of Industry and Ministry of Commerce and relevant stakeholders, is finalizing the roadmap of domestic self-sufficient of recyclable plastic supply for plastic recycling industry to eliminate the importation of plastic scrap. In the context of regional cooperation and partnership, Indonesia, as the biggest ASEAN archipelagic country, is actively lead in combating marine plastic pollution in the region. Indonesia is the first ASEAN member state that has national plan of action in combating marine litter. It set target to reduce 70% marine debris by 2025. It provides strategic direction for all line ministries to contribute to the marine debris reduction goal through a wide array of intervention, including through policy, behavior change program, infrastructural intervention, innovation on technology, and financial mechanism. All in all, Indonesia is fully in favor of Bangkok Declaration and ASEAN Framework of Action of Marine Debris. However, one of our biggest challenges to address marine plastic pollution is the ability to provide financial solution in addressing that issue both at national and regional level. So I do appreciate this forum, this dialogue could find solution to solve the financial challenge in addressing marine plastic pollution. The key element of financial solution is sustainability. In this regard, extended producer responsibility policy and scheme could be an option to build long-term and sustainable financial solution. Finally, I want to emphasize that the key factor for combating marine litter is collaboration among all stakeholders. I do hope this dialogue could bring us together to come up with the best solution that suits for all for addressing marine plastic pollution at local, national, and regional level. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Director Taha, and thank you for your very helpful and inspiring words around the approach that Indonesia is taking to the solid waste management issue generally and to plastics pollution in particular. I particularly enjoyed your comments around the approach that Indonesia is taking to finance, to innovation, to behavior change, and the emphasis you've placed on collaboration and cooperation. You've thrown a challenge to us to help solve the financing challenge, and we certainly hope that the policy dialogue and the follow-up will be able to help in that regard. And finally, you highlighted the EPR as a potential option going forward, and I can say that in the last 2 days, the role of extended producer responsibility has been a major feature of the discussions, and the technicalities around the financing of EPR schemes and the management of EPR schemes has provided a very rich set of insights. So thank you once again, Director Taha, and we very much appreciate your time in your busy schedule to talk with us. Thank you. So colleagues, it is now time for me to bring the dialogue to a close. I know that we already have a lot to digest following the last 2 days of incredibly fruitful discussions. So I'll keep my remarks to close very short. First of all, a huge thank you to you all for your active engagement throughout the dialogue. Without you, the moderators, the speakers, the panelists, the discussants, and the audience, and your participation in the breakout groups and in the chat window, this dialogue would not have been a success. A huge thank you to our dialogue partners, the Indonesian Ministry for Maritime Affairs and Investment, the ASEAN Secretariat, COBSEA, and ESCAP. Without their knowledge of the region, their rich insights into building the agenda, and their hands-on collaboration, this event could not have been possible. And of course, a huge thanks also to my colleagues in the OECD team who have been working tirelessly to make sure that the dialogue is a useful and positive experience for all of you. Perhaps the key message that came across, for me at least, throughout the course of the last 2 days is the tremendous wealth of initiatives and efforts ongoing at various levels and with various players across the region. All working ultimately towards the same simple goal, to reduce and even eliminate marine plastic pollution. Now let's make sure that these efforts reveal that the whole is indeed greater than the sum of the parts. The very elaborate diagrams that were put up by in our opening session there from our colleague Yuna Leon showed that there is a lot going on. The connections are there, but we do need to make sure that indeed the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. So we are all focused on building resilient, inclusive ocean economies. And we heard about the urgency of action. And we saw a snapshot of the richness of the activities and the stakeholders here in the dialogue. We had government officials from 9 ASEAN and 14 OECD member countries. We also had rich participation from international and regional organizations, from multilateral development banks, from global and regional initiatives, not-for-profit organizations, academia, private sector, and philanthropic foundations. So in terms of next steps, we will circulate a summary note from the dialogue, which we hope will capture the discussions, the insights, as well as the challenges and opportunities going forward. We'll also post the slides online with permission from the speakers, and we will digest the findings emerging from the breakout groups and incorporate that into the summary from the dialogue. Above all, let's continue this engagement. The OECD is very pleased to be a partner in this region and to lend the policy expertise and advice in this task of tackling marine plastic pollution. And with that, let me wish you all a happy end to 2020 and the best wishes for 2021. So please stay safe, stay healthy, and I will call this dialogue to a close. And thank you so much, everyone, for your participation. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Anthony. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Anthony. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Asia.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye-bye.